Good morning. I have a few brief notes here for our last section of the chapter, section 7. Once we have learned those 5 different ways that we've been working on this week to solve or to prove triangles are congruent, there's one other thing we're going to look at is using those congruent triangles, how we can use those. So let's go ahead and get notes out and get started here on your section 7 notes. Okay. So once we prove that 2 triangles are congruent, we know that all the corresponding parts have to be congruent. So that's one of the things that we're going to look at here today. So once we know that we have congruent triangles, we know that they all have all corresponding parts that are congruent. So not just the sides, we know that all 3 sides are congruent. But now we can also say that their angles would be congruent and so forth. So let's go ahead and take a look at this first example and so you can see how we use then our corresponding parts. So first of all, if we look at this glider here in this picture, we want to, based on what we have been given, we want to prove that we have a pair of congruent segments here. So I know that angle QRT, so angle QRT here is this angle right there, and that is congruent to angle SRT, so that's that angle right there. So those 2 angles are congruent. And I also know that RTO, RTQ is this angle right here, is congruent to RTS, that's this angle right here. So I've got 2 sets of congruent angles. Now, how can I find that QT is congruent to ST? So how can I figure that out? So that's what I want to prove there. Those 2 sides and parts are congruent to one another. So in order to do that, I only have 2 bits of information. The first thing I would do is I want to prove that the triangles are congruent. So I can prove that the triangles are congruent. Prove that the triangles are congruent. So to do that, I want to use that common side. So how do I prove that? I'm going to prove that, or I'm going to show that RT is congruent to RT. That's that shared side in the hang glider, that center. And I know that those are congruent by the reflexive property. Okay, so that's the reflexive property. So now I can say that the 2 triangles are congruent because I have angle side angle. So I can say here that triangle QRT is congruent to triangle SRT. And I know those are congruent because of angle side angle congruence, one of our 5 ways to prove triangles are congruent. Now that I know that the 2 triangles are congruent, then the next thing I'm going to say is that QT has to be congruent to ST because corresponding parts of congruent triangles have to be congruent. So after I've proven the triangles are congruent, the next step in my proof would be here that QT is congruent to ST because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So CPCTC is how we're going to abbreviate that. So that's the first letter of each of those words there. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So it's the same way we've proved things before, and then I'm going to add one more step saying that this pair of corresponding parts is congruent because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Okay. So part B, we're going to do kind of the same thing here. So far I have 2 sides in one triangle congruent to 2 sides in another triangle. So how can I prove the 2 triangles are congruent? So first thing, I want to prove the triangles are congruent. So I can do that by saying that BD is congruent to BD because of the reflexive property. That allows me to say that the triangles are congruent. So triangle ABD is congruent to triangle CBD by side-side-side congruence. Now that the two triangles are congruent, I can say that corresponding parts are congruent. So now corresponding parts have to be congruent. So angle A must be congruent to angle C, and my reasoning for that would be corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Okay, so your proof looks just like what we've done before. With this would be the last line of the proof. Okay, so prove the triangles are congruent, and then your last line is angle A is congruent to angle C because, and your reason is CP, CTC. Okay. Let's look at example 2 here. How can you use the measurements in the diagram to find the distance across the pond? Well, if you look here, we've got a pair of triangles. We have one pair of congruent sides. We have a second pair of congruent sides. Then I know that these angles have to be congruent because they are vertical angles. So that gives me two pairs of congruent triangles. So I know that triangle AED is congruent to triangle CEB by side angle side congruence. Now because of that, I know that AD must be congruent to BC. So the distance across the pond there, okay, so the pond length there should be 57 yards. And using that idea there of congruent triangles. Okay. All right, that's all we're going to do for notes here today. I want you to go ahead and try your proofs there for homework. And if you need to check in with a partner, you can do that. So our proofs are just like what we've been doing all week. You're going to prove two triangles are congruent, and once you prove that those triangles are congruent, the final step of your proof is the pair of corresponding parts that you want to prove congruent. Okay, so go ahead and work on that, and we'll take questions on Monday. Also, you need to make sure that you're taking time to review your vocabulary Quizlet so you are ready for your chapter test on Tuesday.